We just want to welcome you to beautiful and sunny Washington, D.C. today for a special live chat with Secretary Ken Salazar, who has graciously given up some of his time to answer your questions. It has been a busy week at Interior. On Tuesday, President Obama proclaimed Fort Monroe the 396th national monument in the national park system. And today we are releasing our 50-state America's Great Outdoors report, which has projects in every state across the country. And we will be talking about some of those today. We want to thank you all for submitting your questions. But before we get there, we just want to give the Secretary a moment to just give some introductory remarks. So, Secretary Salazar.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to all of you who are listening in today on this web chat. We're very proud of the conservation agenda for President Obama and our efforts to create a 21st century conservation program for the United States of America. We started on this effort way back at the early part of the administration with the passage of the 2009 Public Lands Act that designated 2 million acres of wilderness, 1,000 miles of wild and scenic rivers, and created new national parks. And we continue our march under the umbrella of the America's Great Outdoors agenda. The America's Great Outdoors agenda, led by my wise counselor, Will Shafroth, has really put forward a vision for the next century of conservation for America. The President asked his cabinet to pull together the America's Great Outdoors report. We did that with my colleagues at the Department of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, and other people who have been very involved with us in this effort. And today we're announcing one of the milestones of the America's Great Outdoors effort, and that is the report which has identified 101 projects from sea to shining sea, 2 in each of our 50 states and then 1 in the District of Columbia, that will help usher in the reality of America's Great Outdoors. The projects that are included, Tim and the audience, in this 101 set of projects include river restoration projects. We have more than 20 river restoration projects. We're trying to make sure that we're putting a major focus on how we restore our rivers as part of a vital reality of our communities and economic development engines as well. We also are opening up a new chapter on urban parks in America, in places like New York and St. Louis and all across the country. And we also are moving forward with our agenda to make sure that the great rural landscapes of America are protected, and that includes places like the Crown of the Continent, places like the Dakota grasslands and the Flint Hills of Kansas. So today's an important day. We are looking very much forward to working with communities and conservationists and economic developers all around the country as we make these projects a reality in the years ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, we have a lot of great questions, so we're going to just jump right into it.
Sure.
The first one comes from Catherine in Minnesota, who says, I'm delighted that you have designated Fort Monroe as a national monument. How can we Americans encourage people of color to use our national monuments and parks as much as those of other heritages do?
It's a very good question, and part of what Director Jarvis and I have been doing is making sure that we have the national parks relevant to all of the American people. We strongly believe the President has been very clear with me, and it's an agenda which he and I have shared for a long time, that we're about an inclusive America. That means everybody has to be involved. And when Ken Burns and Dane Duncan prepared their report on the national parks, they called it America's best idea. Urban communities, people in rural America, people everywhere, no exceptions. And so Fort Monroe is a very special place because it was the beginning of slavery in North America. It also was the end of slavery because the Freedom Fortress there, Fort Monroe, became the crucible for Abraham Lincoln to really think about the outcomes of the war. It's very interesting, as I was at the Lincoln Memorial last night and studying the Gettysburg Address. As the war started, but Abraham Lincoln had said is that he wanted to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And so when the Confederate colonel with the owner of the slaves came to claim his 3 slaves at Fort Monroe, the upholding of the Constitution at the time would have meant that the slaves would have been turned over to the Confederate colonel. But the General Butler, in charge of the fort at that time, came up with a legal theory called the contraband theory and said, no, I can't turn these slaves over to you. And as a result, in a few days, there were over 1,000 slaves that actually came into Fort Monroe and sought it as a refuge. It became known as Freedom Fortress. And several years later, as things progressed, it really was seen as a place where the best thinking on the Emancipation Proclamation took place. And so Fort Monroe is a great place for history. It also is going to be a great economic engine for Virginia, and we're very much looking forward to making it a reality.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Speaking of the economic drivers that the parks do, the next question is from Chuck in Colorado, who asks, what role does the Department of the Interior have in the area of employment, youth employment, and education and environmental preservation?
You know, Chuck, we are very committed to engaging young people in the America's Great Outdoors. It's one of the cornerstones of the America's Great Outdoors report, something which both President Obama and the First Lady have fully embraced in the Let's Move and Let's Move Outside set of initiatives. And we at the Department of Interior are doing everything we can to connect up young people to the work that we do. Over the last several years, just through a directive that I have issued, we've had about 35,000 young people working with us in the department all across America. Now, it's important for us, Chuck, because we will have at least 40% of our workforce retire between now and the next 4 years. And so you think about people who are going to come and replace these workers. It's the young people who are coming up, and we want you to come and work in our wildlife refuges, on our BLM National Landscape Conservation Areas, and so many other positions that we have here at Interior. And we're not alone. There's a whole host of other agencies, or the federal, state, local level, who are looking for the young people as the people who will come and become the next generation of conservationists.
Great, thank you. And if you're a student or a young person and you're looking for an internship or a job at the Department of the Interior, we actually have a youth program set up. So if you want to go to youthgo.gov, there's a lot of information there for you to check out. So once again, it's youthgo.gov. So the next question we'll move on to is another question about Fort Monroe, which is from Harry in Virginia. And he was asked, how will Fort Monroe be staffed and how will it be set up as a national park?
It began its existence as a national park the minute that the president signed the proclamation designating it, and that's the authority that comes under a law which has preserved places like the Grand Canyon and a whole host of other icons of America. We immediately assigned a superintendent, so we have a superintendent on duty already, putting together staffing patterns for Fort Monroe. We're working closely with the local community, and so we have a staff already assigned to Fort Monroe, and we're looking forward to completing the opening of what will be the 396th National Park of the United States of America.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The next question is a more America's Great Outdoors question in general. It's from Marla in New York, and she's asking, what is the best way to be informed on news and updates from America's Great Outdoors, and how can the general public be more involved in this project?
You know, I would say two ways. One is by following us on our website, where we're going to have a place on the website that will give you an update on what we're doing on each of these projects. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, is making sure you're involved with the local community and the stakeholders and the rest of us that will be working on each of these projects. New York, for example, the two major projects we've identified include the Harlem River, where we have a major restoration effort going on there. I was just there a week or so ago, and we need members of the local community who are interested in the restoration of the Harlem River to be very involved, and they are. And so you can become a part of the groups that will ultimately help us design the future of these great projects across the country.
Great, thanks. And we actually have a interactive map at DOI.gov that will show you all 101 projects that we have listed as priority projects, so you can check those out right after this chat. We'll move over to another economic question, and this comes from John in Virginia. A lot of questions from Virginia this week. In this current economy, how does the Department of the Interior plan to support financially Fort Monroe and the national monument that it will require?
You know, at this point in time, what we're doing is we're finding resources to make sure that we're able to move forward with the opening of Fort Monroe as a national park and that we have it staffed. We need to have the resources for our national parks and for the conservation agenda. And right now, there is a reality in Washington and our nation, and that is that we're dealing with some very difficult economic times and some very tough deficits. And so what we're doing is we're being more efficient here at Interior. We're saving some $500 million just through information technology innovations. We are doing a lot to save money, but at the same time we are also pushing Congress to make sure that they're investing in conservation, and our hope is that we'll have the resources to be able to continue the husbandry of these great national assets which the Department of Interior oversees.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And just a note for people who are joining us right now, the entire web chat that we're having, which is another youth question from Leo, who's asking, what is the National Park Service doing to get the next generation of Americans to visit?
Personal. We recognize that part of what we need to do is to make sure that people know what the opportunities are to visit some of these places and the rich history. and you need to be able to communicate to do that. And that means we're going to use the whole panoply of social media tools to make sure that we have the right outreach. But it's a very good question, Leo.
Yeah, and most national parks actually have presence on Facebook and Twitter. So if you type in your local national park, you'll probably be able to find some very detailed information on what's going on in those parks. So it's a great question. The next one is from Carl in California, and his question is, how was it decided that each state would get 2 priority projects?
I asked my senior staff, the directors of the bureaus, and Councillor Shafra to meet with governors in every one of the states. I probably met with 15 or 20 governors around the country myself, and asked them, we sent a letter out saying we want your priority projects. Some of them responded right away, some of them didn't, so we came back, we followed up, we had meetings. At the end of it, we looked for projects that we thought were ones that were doable. There are thousands of projects literally in conservation all across America. Every state has dozens of projects. But these are 2 projects in every state where we think we have something to offer at the national level from Interior. And with the right kind of partnerships with the local community, state governments, nonprofits, as well as the business community, we think that these are projects that we can prioritize and we can make happen.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We have another economic question. This one is in also from Catherine in Virginia. She says, I'm glad that you emphasized job creation in your announcement. And she was asking, have you thought of creating a jobs creation task force within Interior or other types of groups to focus on the economic issues?
The answer to that is yes. We strongly believe that as we look at the economic future of America, that tourism and outdoor recreation are a key part of that future. Between now and the year 2021, we have to create another 21 million jobs for the United States of America. We believe that somewhere between 2.1 and 3.3 million jobs can be created just through outdoor recreation and through tourism. And so we have developed an action plan and are working with other agencies and the President's team to move that program forward. There is no doubt for people who live in places like Kalispell, Montana, right outside of Glacier, that when you have a national park in your community, it becomes the central economic driver. And that's going to happen at Fort Monroe. Through the Fort Monroe Development Authority, but a national park there, you're going to see many jobs that are going to be created. The outdoor recreation industry alone believes that it creates somewhere in the neighborhood of 8.4 million jobs a year. And that's out of a recent report that was done by a consulting group by the name of Southwick. So we know that hunters and bikers and boaters and walkers and hikers and everybody that uses the outdoors and those who visit places like Fort Monroe are bringing money into the local community. The tourism industry, it's known as heads on beds, and that means that the more people you have visiting a community, they bring their dollars, and that ends up creating jobs. And so that's why each of these projects that we've listed here, these 101 projects, are very important to job creation in these states.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, we have about time for 2 more questions, so we're just going to get right into it. This one's from Keith. Will the AGO initiative include any programs that will reach Indian country youth?
Yes, indeed. We have had an agenda at the Department of Interior directed by the President that we open up a whole new chapter in our relationship with the nation's First Americans. And having the nation's First Americans involved with us as we move forward with the conservation agenda is very important. We have 565 tribes in the United States of America, massive land holdings, and we're looking for opportunities to make sure that they are part of this America's Great Outdoors agenda.
Great. Thank you. And finally, we have a question from Brenda in Pennsylvania. And her question is, will the America's Great Outdoors Initiative help states link their priority projects around large landscapes like the Chesapeake Bay, for example?
Yes, we will do that. And in fact, Fort Monroe is on the Chesapeake, and we have other efforts going on in the Chesapeake. Tomorrow we will be making an announcement with Governor O'Malley in Maryland on the efforts that we have going on the Anacostia. The Anacostia is a major river restoration effort where we've already made significant progress. We have a lot more work ahead of us. But what will happen as a result of the America's Great Outdoors is that you'll be able to link up all these various projects on the Chesapeake that will allow us to get the job done in a larger scale than if we were just looking at it project by project.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are unfortunately out of time today. If your question was asked and you asked a question and we weren't able to get to it, we plan on doing more chats in the future. We'll also be trying to respond to as many people as we can online. You can send in more questions at DOI.gov. You can follow us on Twitter at Interior or on Facebook at U.S. Interior. Until next time, I want to thank the Secretary again and thank everybody. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, sir.